was like the line at Starbucks. It was just crazy. And then, hey friends, I'm just talking to my pal Russell from Up. Might have seen him before, but we were just hanging out here, and I was talking about getting coffee at Starbucks, and thought I'd chat with you a little bit about what we chatted about in the basement on Sunday, July 12th. To jump in, here we go. Before the world kind of fell apart for a little bit, on Sunday mornings, we were going through something like this. Periods of the Bible. Talking about how the Bible fits together, because it does. Isn't that neat? Everything in the Bible points to Jesus. The Old Testament points to Jesus. The New Testament points to Jesus. The whole Bible, it points to Jesus. In history class, maybe like a history class that Mr. Cost would teach, you talk about certain periods of history. Maybe you talk about periods in world history and U.S. history. And the timeline, it can be divided up to help you remember what happened when or where. The same thing can be done with the Bible. Like this. So if you've been coming on Sunday mornings, this looks familiar. If you haven't, well, now it looks familiar because you just saw it about 3 seconds ago, so it's familiar no matter what. We're going to jump back in to talking about how the Bible fits together, certain periods of the Bible, and this entire school year, starting last fall, we started going through the Old Testament. And we were working our way through it, and we're going to continue to work through that until at least the end of the summer. So today, I just want to give us a quick review, going back to what we learned so far so that we can continue to grow and learn more about how the Bible fits together, specifically the Old Testament. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Pretty awesome. So the first period of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1 through chapter 11, is what we call origins, right? It's like you're molding the earth. The origins, the period of origins, can be also then divided up into like sub-periods or subcategories: foundation, fall, flood, federation. And so those are kind of right self-explanatory. The foundation of the world, the beginning of it, the creation, then the fall, where sin came into the world because Adam and Eve chose to go against God. The flood, where the entire earth was covered in water. And I know a guy, this guy named Noah and his family are saved from the destruction of the earth. And God tells Noah to build an ark, put 2 of every kind of animal on the ark. And that's the rainbow at the end to show that that's his promise to us as his people, to Noah, right? If you don't know it, I'd love to chat with you about it. And then we have federation. That's when we read about the Tower of Babel. And that's a really crazy story. So if you want to read that, hop to the book of Genesis. So you have origins, the period of origins. Next, we move to the patriarchs. So God speaks to a guy named Abraham. He chooses a guy named Abraham, and he begins a covenant with him, a promise that Abraham's descendants will outnumber the stars in the sky. I don't know why I'm pointing to the ceiling. I'm pretending that they're stars. But that's what he tells Abraham, and he begins a covenant with him. And so Genesis 12 through 50 is the period known as the patriarchs. And so the patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And the motion to help you remember the patriarchs is simply this. Okay? Just stroke your beard. Just pull it down. Like you're combing through it. Because You haven't shaved in a while. So you have origins, Genesis 1 through 11, and then patriarchs, Genesis 12 through 50. We have the story of Joseph, who is one of Jacob's sons. And I mean, Joseph's story, like, man, if it was on Netflix, again, we would totally binge that so fast. Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers, hashtag worst brothers ever. God works all things together for good, and he's placed in a position of power and authority in Egypt. Pretty rad. God works through this horrible situation that Joseph was placed in. Then it says in chapter 1 of the book of Exodus, starting in verse 6, in time, Joseph and all his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly, they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. And he said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are, so we must make a plan to keep them from growing any more. Verse 11 says, so the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. So now we have the Israelites, Abraham's descendants, as slaves to the Egyptians. So bondage. I felt like a genie when I did that, but that's not it. The Israelites are in bondage. They are slaves to the Egyptians. But then comes a guy named Moses. God tells Moses that I'm going to use you to lead my people out of Egypt. And so they are liberated. The next period is liberation. Exodus 12 through the book of Leviticus. And this is where we read about the 10 Commandments. We read about Moses going up to Mount Sinai, meeting with God, and then the Israelites make bad choices, and there's just a lot of bad choices that they make that go against God. But God is still God, and he's in control, and he cares for them, and he protects them. Their bad choices come with a consequence. And God he uses Moses to deliver them out of slavery, out of Egypt. And he says, I'm going to take you to a land, to the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. That's a good thing. God's given this promise to his people, to the Israelites. And he says, I will lead you through Moses. Yay! They make some really poor choices. And God says, you're going to have to wander in the desert for 40 years. Have you ever ran on a treadmill? It's not always fun because you're running, but you're not going anywhere. I mean, it's great. Your heart's pumping, you're getting all those good endorphins from exercising, but you're not going anywhere. Well, this period of the book of Numbers, of the books Numbers and Deuteronomy, it's a treadmill. Because the Israelites, they're wandering. They're wandering in the desert for 40 years. And in these books, you read the accounts of what happens while they're wandering in the desert, and then you also have more laws and things that God gives to the Israelites to say, I will be my God. I will be your God, and you will be my people. Finally, after lots of time doing this, the Israelites get to the promised land. Woo! Here's the thing. Not everybody gets to go into the promised land. So you got to kind of read what happens. And we chatted about this earlier this school year. So if you want to go back and read through Numbers and Deuteronomy, well, it's a lot, but you can, to see what leads us up to this point. But we get to the book of Joshua. Moses does not get to go into the promised land. Because of choices that he made to go against God. And so God chooses a guy named Joshua to lead the Israelites into the promised land. We have this period of time, the book of Joshua, known as Occupation Overthrow. The motion to help you remember this is bring up your Thor hammer, all right? And then you bring it down. So Occupation Overthrow. So this whole book of Joshua is about the Israelites to make their home in the promised land. It's pretty crazy. It's a pretty crazy book. This brings us to a period known as the MerryGoRound. It's good. I'm in promised land. It should be fun, right? It's great. We got milk. We got honey. It's good. The Israelites get caught up into this cycle of sin, slavery, sorrow, salvation, and silence. And it happens a lot. And so we call the period of Judges through Ruth the MerryGoRound. It goes round and around and around and around. And it might remind you a little bit of the treadmill, because just like the merry-go-round and just like the treadmill, you're not going anywhere. Nope, not going anywhere. Israelites, they have these judges, right? See what God did there? Book of Judges. Where he places people in authority over them to help them understand more about who God is and what it is that they are called to do to live in obedience with God. Again, like I said, it's this cycle of sin, slavery, sorrow, salvation, silence. Not science, silence. And it's this merry-go-round. Well, finally, there's this guy named Samuel. And he is chosen by God. He has direct communication with God, and he speaks to the people and helps them try to follow God. And like I said before, and obey, live in obedience with God. Well, the Israelites, they're like, oh my gosh, we want a king. Like all these other countries, like all these other lands. Like, why don't we have a king? They have a king. We really want a king. Samuel's like, why? You've got king of everything. Why do you want a human king? It says this in 1 Samuel 8 that Israel requests a king. And so it says, as Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons to be judges over Israel. But they were not like their father, for they were greedy for money. They accepted bribes and they perverted justice. So finally, all the elders of Israel met to discuss the matter with Samuel. And they said, look, they told him, you are old and your sons are not like you. Meaning that his sons were not walking in the way that God had intended for them to walk. And they say to Samuel, give us a king to judge us like all the other nations have. And it says Samuel was displeased with their request and went to the Lord for guidance. But this is what God said. Do everything they say to you, for they are rejecting me, not you. They don't want me to be their king any longer. Ever since I brought them from Egypt, they have continually abandoned me and followed other gods. And now they are giving you the same treatment. Do as they ask, but solemnly warn them about the way a king will reign over them. Once we get into the book of 1 Samuel, we begin a period of the Bible known as Unification. Okay, I can barely do it with my fingers, but it's like this, right? So your three fingers in the middle, kind of intertwined. Like I said, I can't do it. There, I got it. So 1 Samuel begins this period of time known as Unification, where God gives Israel what they want, kings. And so we begin with King Saul, then we have King David and King Solomon. That's where we're going to be at for the next few weeks. And this book, or this period of unification, it runs through 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1 Kings 1 through 11, Psalms, Proverbs, and Song of Solomon. So this is a giant chunk of the Old Testament that occurs during this period. You ready to go back and start at the beginning and move through it? You ready? I know you are. We have origins. The beginning. Genesis, Patriarchs. Bondage. The liberation. Treadmill. Occupation. Overthrow. MerryGoRound. Unification. Next week, we are going to get into when Saul meets Samuel and becomes the first king of Israel. I hope that maybe this helped you remember a little bit about what we chatted about during the school year. I know it seemed like forever ago, but hopefully it helped you remember some things. And if while I was chatting about all of these periods of the Bible, you're like, what was that story? What was that story about the guy with the hair and it was really long and then he cut it because there was this girl named Delilah and she was like, oh my gosh, Samson. You can go back and you can read that. If you have any questions, let me know. You are loved, you matter, and you belong.